Hey, good morning, everyone. Lance Tarchioni here with you live on Ask the Agronomist. Welcome, and coming to you from a new remote location today. So I'm actually sitting in one of the loan officers' offices here in the Farmington branch of the Bank of Yates City. So does that sound like a weird place to do Ask the Agronomist from? Well, yes, I agree with you. It is. Team's been teasing me a lot this morning. I told him we were going to have to do Ask the Agronomist from here because I had a critical meeting at the bank today that I was going to be skipping out on briefly to for a little while to do the broadcast, and then I need to get back into the meeting. And so they were wondering if the bank was calling my loan or if I was having financial problems or what I had going on. So in full disclosure, the financial health of L&R Cattle Company is good, and I'm here at the Bank of Yates City today because I'm a director for the Bank of Yates City. So, in addition to my bare job as an agronomist and my farming operation, and being a dad to three kids and a crappy husband to my wife, I'm also I've been on a lot of boards. So I was Farm Bureau board at one point in time. I was on so that's been kind of cool to learn about the banking industry and see the banking industry from a different perspective. Sometimes banks don't have the best reputation with people, and I like to think that our bank helps a lot of people, but we make money while we're doing it, and that's the part that people tend to have a bit of a problem with, I guess. But anyway. As our radio commercials say, Bank of Yates City, the smart money banks here. So anyway, that's all I'll do for a commercial here for the bank. But appreciate them letting me steal some internet and use some office space here. And so I'm going solo again today. So no producer help here, and so you're going to have to make do with just me. I don't have Adam or Jennifer in here to help me out, and I'm going to be watching my phone here because I'm waiting for a text from Chris Carlisle with a soybean yield update. Chris took some of his early beans out at Auburn yesterday at his plot site there, and kind of anxious to see what those rascals made. We've had just very few reports of bean yields coming in. I know a producer, this would be in central Knox County, harvested some 2.7 beans late last week that were in the mid to upper 70s, which he was happy with. This guy grows 80 bushel beans, so he's not doing cartwheels over mid to upper 70s, but that's not bad. And he did make one observation that I'll share with you. The seed size was extremely small. This guy's a seed dealer for us, and so he knows a little bit about soybean seed size. And he just looking at them, he eyeball guessed them at about 3,400 seeds per pound. So if in fact they are that small, had they come in at 27 or 28 or 2,900 or even 3,000 seeds per pound, they would have been several bushels per acre higher. So that'll be one thing to watch as you get into beans, what the seed size looks like, and seed size in beans. That's one of the reasons it's virtually impossible to yield check soybeans, because the difference in yield between a 2,600 and a 3,400 is big. And while the size of a soybean when you plant it has nothing to do with its yield potential, the size of it when you harvest it certainly does. So soybean seed size is controlled a little bit by genetics. There are varieties that tend to have bigger seeds, but it's primarily environmentally determined. So as you get into soybean harvest, another thing to watch for would be green stems. I was walking some plots a couple of days ago with some people, and we're picking out varieties that had green stems, and that's kind of a negative these days. People don't like green stem beans; they tend to be tough to cut, and sometimes they have green stems because they're really healthy, but more often they have green stems because they didn't have a heavy enough pod load on them to utilize all the resources that the plant had available to it to fill pods and make seeds. And sometimes it's not really pod count as much as it is seed count. So, obviously, if you've got 100 3-bean pods on a plant, that is a much heavier load on that plant than 100 2-bean pods. So pay attention to not only pod count, but seed count per pod. And it's actually not the number of pods per plant that's driving yield. It's the number of seeds per plant that's driving yield, and then the size and weight of those seeds. So anyway, and good to see Adam logging in there on the chat. So Adam is following along here in the chat. So maybe he can save me if I miss something. And before we get too deep into this episode, I can touch on something that I was supposed to touch on 2 weeks ago. I'd had a request from a good listener, a viewer of ours, to talk about anthracnose top dieback because they felt like they were just seeing more of that than normal, and I would agree, you are, and just something in the environment this year, in the weather patterns, in the stresses, and the times we were wet, the times we were dry. Hard to say exactly what sometimes makes certain diseases so prevalent in a year, but anthracnose top dieback is in virtually every field of corn in the state, and even some hybrids that are fairly resistant to anthracnose stalk rot, still have anthracnose top dieback. So what that tells you is there's an anthracnose infection in that plant. You are probably likely to see anthracnose stalk rot in those plants. You will also sometimes very often, find some crown rot in those plants. Now, I don't necessarily consider anthracnose to be a crown rot fungus, but it is very common when we send root balls in to have them analyzed to see what we find in there in a crown rot ghosted plant. Very common to find anthracnose in there. So I don't know what role anthracnose plays in crown rot, if it plays any role at all, or if it just happens to be there because it was going to be there anyway. And I've got a few pictures here in a minute. I'll show you, or attempt to show you on my iPad. They kind of illustrate you can have plants with a dead top and a green bottom, which do not have crown rot. You can have plants with that are dead from top to bottom that have both anthracnose and crown rot. And you can have plants that are dead top to bottom that have only crown rot and minimal anthracnose. So you can find all versions of that. So anthracnose top dieback by itself is harmful to yield, but not near to the extent that crown rot is. So if the only thing that happens to the plant is the top 3 or 4 leaves die, that's bad because those are the ones that are getting the most sunlight. Those are the ones that, we were kind of counting on the top of that plant to stay healthy to finish the ear. If the top of the plant's not healthy, but the rest of the plant is, that plant can still finish that ear. Now, is it going to lose a little bit of kernel weight, kernel size because the top of the plant died early? Probably. But it's not going to lose near as much kernel weight and size as if the whole plant dies early, which is what happens from crown rot. So we'll talk a lot more about crown rot and some observations and some maybe some management tips, and a lot more to learn there. I got a text from a dealer last night that was pretty frustrated and says, "Hey, figure this crown rot thing out, would you?" So I told him we were working on that. So it's it's interesting, the ebb and flow of diseases that we get passionate about. I mean, I remember probably 10 years ago, I think we thought diplodia was going to be the end of, raising corn in central Illinois for some people. I knew growers that went out and bought moldboard plows to plow residue under. They were so frustrated with diplodia. And diplodia is a very insidious disease, one of my least favorite diseases, and much like crown rot, there ain't a hell of a lot you can do about it. And weather conditions drive it, but for whatever reason, we haven't had a bad diplodia year for a long time, and we're not growing significantly different genetics than we were when we had more diplodia. We are doing less corn on corn, But even producers who are still doing corn on corn are not struggling with diplodia near as much as they were maybe 10 years ago. So it's still out there. It could still be bad. It'll raise its ugly head again one of these days. But we talk a lot more these days about crown rot, and what's changed. I think some of what's changed is we're pushing these plants so hard. The yield potential of these plants is so high, and they are working so hard during the grain fill period to finish filling that ear. And when we get some stress, boom, there comes your crown rot. So, I don't know if there's more to it than that, but it's just interesting if you look over, my career, different eras and periods where a particular disease was the bane of our existence, and now we don't talk too much about that, and some other disease is the bane of our existence. So, um, it just it changes over time. So check out. Oh, this guy's saying good morning. So I thought we had some questions in the chat there. So I'm going to try to keep one eye on that. So let's talk a little bit about yields. So if you haven't started harvest yet, or if you haven't gotten to know what your yields are going to look like, shocker, yields are variable. How many of you get tired of somebody in the seed business talking about how yields are variable? You could put that on replay, and you could say that every year. I mean, even in perfect years, your yields are variable, and I would say yields are more variable this year than typical. So the differences within a field and the differences from one field to the next could be extreme this year, and that could be due to drought stress. That could be due to root lodging from the derecho. That could be due to late season plant health from crown rot. That could be due to hybrid differences. Could be due to all the above. But if you want to know the range of yields that I have seen and heard, it would be 130 to 340. So that doesn't tell you much about where you're going to land in there. I would say yields have been improving as we have gone through harvest. So we're seeing a pretty strong trend that's favoring fuller season hybrids. So most people got into some of their early stuff, and it was maybe better than they were expecting, but it wasn't great. But as they've gotten into some fuller season corn, they're finding better yields. I don't know that there's going to be anybody that's going to have as good a crop as they had last year, but there are some pockets where it's going to be pretty darn close to as good as last year. And I would say even the places where it's not going to be as good as last year, it's within 10 to 15% of last year, which, considering the growing season we had and all this crop's been through, I think you ought to be pretty damn proud of getting within 10 to 15% of what was maybe your best corn crop ever that you raised in 2022. So it'll vary a lot. I'd say if you've got fields that are vastly different than other fields in your operation, check out your climate, see if they caught a little more rain in June or July than other farms. Look at your planting date, look at what the hybrid is, look at differences in your management. Is it corn on corn? Soil types and planting date make a huge difference in crown rot. So I got one report just yesterday, came in on, this happened to be 5982 was the hybrid. Growers got two small fields, two 3-acre patches, and that's where they started their harvest yesterday. One of the patches is good ground that they till. The other patch is some HEL ground that's a little bit lighter that they no-till. And all year long we've been kind of tough on no-till because the no-till corn looked pretty tough. Did not look good going through the dry weather. Was slower to get roots developed. Just under a lot more stress early. And ironically, that early stress may be part of the rest of this story that I'm going to tell you. So grower pulls into the work ground field. Corn's dead as a post, way drier than he expected it to be. And the yield was okay. He didn't tell me what the yield was. He just told me what the yield difference was. So, a little bit bummed. He pulls out of that field, goes into the other 3-acre patch, which is lighter soil and no-till. It was still had quite a bit of green in it. It was, I think he told me 4 or 5 points wetter. and yielding 40 bushel more than the other patch was. And honestly, I would say the corn that ended up yielding 40 bushel less would have been the corn that all through May, June, July, even into early August, probably looked like it was going to be better. And it didn't work out that way. When corn dies early, it loses a tremendous amount of yield potential. You get shallow kernels, you get light kernels, and that field that was maybe going to yield 20 bushel less, if it got, the timing would have been different. Timing of pollination would have been different. We all saw these light soil fields and no-till fields that just got stunted and set back and delayed, and they didn't tassel until later in the season. Maybe tasseling at a different time was a benefit. Maybe being out of sync with that other field was a benefit. Avoiding a crown rot infection was certainly a benefit. But little things that you would think wouldn't make a damn bit of difference are making 40 plus bushel differences in yield and up to 5 points difference in moisture, because it's making, you're comparing dead to live. And that died early, as you're traveling through the field and the yield monitor, you're going to come in an area where things are going to get pretty quiet in the combine. Your fuel efficiency is going to go way up because your yield went way down, and that machine's not working very hard at all. And you're going to look up at that yield monitor, and you're going to see you're picking 15, 16% corn already. It's dead as a post. Tops are falling out of it. You might even have some stalks that have already laid over, and it's yielding about 160 bushel. And that kind of sucks. And then you go out of that spot and you come into a green spot where the plant's still intact, still got all the leaves on it, got some green left in it. You look over at the yield monitor, and instead of 15%, now it's 21. And instead of 160, it's 260. That is the range you're going to see, traveling through cornfields this year, and a lot of that's crown rot, not all of it, but a lot of it is. I've got a video I'm going to try to show on my iPad. I'm hoping I can hold it in front of the camera right, and you guys will be able to see this video. There's ways you can evaluate how much crown rot you got in your fields, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that we're seeing that are helping this year. Now, just because something helps doesn't mean it eliminates it. Every year is different. Some of the things that are helping, you may not be able to do. You may not be willing to do. You may not. If you're sitting there going, "What's crown rot? My corn looks great. I don't have a problem." Good. That's all right. But if you're frustrated with, stuff that's died early, lack of plant health, and things that are just falling apart faster than you think they should, that kind of describes every cornfield in the state, honestly. But it varies as you travel around, and it varies somewhat with the maturity of the corn. Generally speaking, this is definitely true in our lineup, and I think it's true in other people's lineups as well. The 115 RM stuff is far healthier and yielding far better, generally speaking, than the 110-day stuff. So, it just seems like one of those years where, whether it's just the difference in the genetics, or is it the difference in timing of flowering, or the difference in when that plant was trying to fill that ear, or what have you. But there's a pretty big difference in maturity, especially in places where we've had a lot more stress. You travel in areas that have had, I've got a small part in the northern part of my territory that had like 18 inches of rain in July and August combined. Pretty green there. Don't see a lot of crown rot there. Very low stress during grain fill there. And if you have low stress through grain fill, crown rot's going to essentially go away. That is the single biggest factor to how much crown rot you see, is how much stress you have during grain fill. Now, how much can you influence through grain fill? You can put on a VT fungicide, and we'll talk about that. That helps. I'm going to check my phone here just in case waiting for that text from Cal to find out what his beans yield. So The other thing, and I see we had a question come in. Haven't done a lot of corn yet, but my fields that got hail July 15th with RP. What's RP, Tom? Explain that text a little more, Tom, if you can, so make sure I understand the question you're asking. I haven't talked much about hail, but I will mention the derecho event, June 29th. A lot of root lodging. This root lodge corn is a mess. The damage that was done to those roots, the stress that was put on those plants, the closer you were to pollination when you went over, the worse it's going to be. But the root lodge stuff's got a lot more crown rot in it. Yield is way off. Plants are falling apart. Plants are dying early, and you're not going to be able to get that stuff in the head forever if it starts to deteriorate too much. So if you've got root lodge corn, I'd be getting on that as soon as you can. Get that stuff out. Get it behind you. It's probably going to be your worst corn. It's definitely going to be the most frustrating to harvest. And let's end harvest on a positive note with some standing corn that's yielding better, and get that root lodge stuff out as early as you can. So while I'm waiting for Tom to clarify his question there, let's talk a little bit more about crown rot. So crown rot is a generic term. There actually is technically not a disease called crown rot. There we go. Okay. 40-50% damage, doing better than some without hail. How can it be? Let's see. 40-50%. You're talking like grain damage, like grain quality, 40-50% damage. Is that what you mean, Tom? Is doing better than some without 40-50% hail damage. Okay. So it's in. This is a great example, Tom. Thanks for asking the question. I mentioned the wacky stuff that people are texting me every day. So Tom's the first one of the day with something wacky. Yesterday I had 2 or 3 wacky ones. I already told you one. I'll probably tell you the other one here in a bit. But just bizarre stuff we're seeing this year, and this is such an extreme year. I mean, we were don't forget, planted earlier than we've ever planted. Great conditions at planting, other than it was colder than hell. Took a while for stuff to get going. Generally speaking, we got decent stands, but stuff kind of went through some tough times there early. And then it got freakishly dry after Mother's Day. We were going to set a record for the driest June in history until the derecho event screwed that up for us. Still upset about that, by the way. You know, if you're going through hell, set a record. I say, you know, do something cool while you're being miserable, and break that record for the driest June in history. We didn't get to do that. I could have waited one more day to get that rain that saved my corn crop. One day wouldn't have made that much difference. I wanted that record, but we'll work on that again some other year. But anyway, I digress. So it's possible, Tom, and honestly, I think some of the differences in plant health that we are seeing, and people think this is a seed agronomist making up crazy excuses for why his product didn't perform in some cases, but high yield potential hybrids are being punished for their ambition this year. And in some cases, the more yield potential you had at the end of pollination or early in grain fill, the deader the field is, the more crown rot it has, and the less it's going to yield. So if you had anything that reduced your yield potential up front, so poor stand, maybe late planted in some cases, maybe poor fertility in some cases, maybe a hailstorm, what have you. If something reduced your yield potential up front and prohibited that crop from having 300 plus bushel yield potential, which a lot of fields did at pollination time, even in spite of the fact that we had a small factory this year. So we had plants that were smaller than normal due to the drought. We had reduced leaf area. You had a factory that was not as big as normal. You had a factory that was not going to be able to produce as much sugar as normal. You was not going to be able to photosynthesize as good as normal. And it had a monstrous potential amount of yield on it. and that set that plant up to go through hell during grain fill, trying to fill that monstrously big potential that it had. So I get to the rest of my story for Tom. It's possible. It could be hybrid differences, could be field differences, could be who the heck knows what the differences could be. I'm just speculating here. If it's the same hybrid, if it's a similar field, if it had the same amount of rainfall. Now, the other thing is, did that hailstorm give you an inch of rain with it? I mean, usually you don't just get hail, you get rain with it. So if you got more rain where you got the hail, could be as simple as that. But it could also be that the hail actually reduced the yield potential of the hybrid, which reduced the amount of stress it was under during grain fill, which kept the plant healthier, didn't die as early, maybe didn't die prematurely at all. And it might have been going to yield less, but because it stayed healthier, it ended up yielding more. So, this is it's hard to fathom the fact that a hybrid might actually be yielding less because it was going to yield more. Okay, Tom. Yeah. So Tom got 2.7 inches of rain with the hail. Aha. Might be something to that 2.7 inches of rain. So, and it doesn't take 2.7 inches of rain to make a difference. It could have been 4/10, could be 3/4 of an inch. So look through those rainfall totals by farm. That's the cool thing about climate. You can say it doesn't agree with your rain gauge. I know it doesn't agree with your rain gauge. That's because your rain gauge is wrong. But before you get mad at me, climate's wrong too. They're all wrong. It's just an estimate. So go with it, okay? So you can look at that field average rainfall by field. So you don't have to look by farm, it's by field. And if you've got fields that fall out of bed, or you got fields that you're going, damn, I can't believe how good that was. Look back at that weather history and climate and see if there's something in there that kind of explains that. It might not be the hybrid, might not, I know we all want to, seed companies. Farmer wants to give credit to his fertility program. Some people want to give credit. Some people want to give credit to, whatever you want to give credit to. But it might have just been the weather, unfortunately, that made something good or bad. So look into that. So I'm going to check this to see if I've got anything. There we go. Okay. So, 74 bushel average, which now this is early planted soybeans. This would have been, I think Chris told me, the Tuesday after Easter, maybe, or sometime around Easter. Really good ground. Chris raised 100 bushel beans there last year doing the same thing. These average 74, and all he's harvested is his early beans. So I think he went from like a 2.6 up to a 3.1 is what was ready to cut. The range was 68 to 82 with an average of 74. So that's just one location, but it's one location that usually raises some pretty good beans. I think, I don't know. It's anytime you start guessing what beans are going to do, you just end up looking like a dummy. So I try not to do. I look dumb enough as it is without trying to guess bean yields. And I thought in early August that we might be headed for a phenomenal bean year, and there may be places that do have phenomenal beans. I know we've seen, I've seen some yield monitor shots of beans up in the 90s, kind of coming from further south, but pretty isolated situations. So, I don't think beans are going to be bad. They may not be spectacular, but I mean, I know once you've had 100, 74 is kind of disappointing. But I won't be disappointed in 74 bushel beans on my farm. I'll tell you that. And I think a lot of people will probably have corn and beans that are pretty good, maybe not great, but pretty good. And if you look back to the weather we had and the environment we had and the challenges we've had, if you're raising, above average crops, I'd say you're doing pretty well. So I'm going to try to share this video, and I apologize. Frustrating thing for you guys to watch. We'll see if we can make this work. So I just took this last night. I was taking some root samples in this field, and I had this idea while I was there. And I'm going to try. So this is and so I'm going to try to hold this thing where you can see the video and not shake it around too much. And there's audio with it, so I'm going to turn on the speaker. Hey team, Lance here. A lot of times you get called out to fields that have already been harvested, and all you know about the field is corn was falling apart. The grower was disappointed in yield. But I was going to show you one thing you can do. Sweep the residue away and look closely at the lower stalks. Now, this field was harvested a few days ago. Grower had stalk stompers on his head. So a lot of these stalks have been pushed over, kinked over, but you can definitely tell healthy plant. The intermediate, not very healthy, but not as dead as some dead plant. And if you look close on these really dead ones, it doesn't take much to dislodge that root system, knock a little soil off. Not much left there. That thing's pretty well toast. Here, knocked it out of the ground. So all these plants here, some a respectable root done this ahead of time. This would have been a professionally produced Jennifer Elliott, Chris Callow. This would have been done ahead of time, and you wouldn't have to wait. I'm going to pop one of these babies out just so you can see the difference in roots. Notice here, it's actually not super easy to get this one out of the ground. At the size of that, how much soil is coming up with that. Look at how many hair roots, small roots are still here. Look how it's hanging onto that soil. If every root ball looked like that at harvest, we wouldn't be having the conversations we're having. But unfortunately, too many root balls look like these at harvest. And the difference between this and this is the presence of crown rot and other pathogens and stress during grain fill. Look at that stalk there. That baby will be good till Thanksgiving. That one didn't make it to Labor Day. All right. Well, I got some feedback via text. So friend of mine said video is crap. And then shortly after that, I got one from Jennifer saying I was holding it too close to the camera. So I backed it off just a little bit, hoping that got better. So we will continue to try to improve our ability to share video here on Ask the Agronomist, but hopefully you were able to get something out of that. If you could not and you'd like me to text it to you, feel free to send me a text request and I'll send that to you. And maybe Jennifer can, we'll probably maybe get that posted on our YouTube channel. That's actually what we'll do. So Jennifer, if you're watching, you've got that video in a text from me already. If you wouldn't mind getting that posted to our YouTube channel, people can check it out on there, and you can see some good quality. She's on the ball already. So anyway, crown rot's just a terribly frustrating thing. It can ruin an otherwise amazing crop. So some of the things that we're seeing that are making a difference, and some of these are probably more dramatic this year than I've seen them in the past, but I would say year in and year out, I see the same things that make a difference. Some of these things are easier said than done. Some of them are more effective than others. Number one is going to be planting date. And every year we have bad crown rot. The earliest planted corn is the worst. It's just, I think it gets more crown rot infection in the roots early because it's in that cold, wet soil in April and early May. The stuff that gets planted in mid-May sometimes almost completely avoids it, or at least has it much less severely. Now, if that early planted corn had more yield potential, had bigger, bigger ears, better ear count, better, more potential. The more potential you have going into grain fill, the more likely you are to see crown rot, because crown rot's not gonna be a big issue. If we'd have missed the late June, early July rain, so if the derecho had never happened and we would have, heaven forbid, had to go through pollination without any moisture, and then we got rain in August like we did. So basically, let's assume this year was exactly like it was up to the derecho, but we missed the derecho. And we didn't get any rain between June 29th and July 4th. And let's say in late July, we started getting rain. You would have corn that's yielding, sub 150. You would have had ears that tip back tremendously. You'd have zipper ears. You'd have ears with, say 250 kernels on them. You'd have no crown rot. You'd have beautiful, healthy green plants with poor yields because you would have lost yield potential at pollination. We pollinated perfectly. We came through pollination with flying colors because we got that moisture. And then we had a stressful grain fill period, sometimes too dry, sometimes too hot, sometimes both. People ask about the impact of the hazy, smoggy, smoky, cloudy days. Well, that didn't help anything. Normally, solar radiation is not a yield limiting factor, but it could have been an additional stress that prevented that plant from maybe producing as much sugar on those days as it otherwise would have. And another thing that leads to crown rot is a lack of sugar in the stalk and the root system. The plant would be lacking in sugar because it's cannibalizing itself. So it cannot it cannot make what it needs through photosynthesis. So it is sorry, here I'm getting a flurry of text. I'm going to make sure that's nothing important. Okay, nope, just our team chat people sending me stuff. So anyway, that those plants, if they can't produce what they need through is trying to make as much as it can of itself, and if it can't make what it needs through photosynthesis, it's going to rob it. It's going to rob it from the leaves. It's going to rob it from the stalks. It's going to rob it from the roots. And as that plant is cannibalizing itself, it is depleting stored sugar in those plant tissues, and it's doing what it's made to do. I mean, a plant, it's good that plants are able to remobilize sugar because that enables them to maximize their yield. But if they remobilize all of it and leave none left in the stalk and the roots, that means that plant is very susceptible to lots of fungal infections, because having a high sugar concentration actually makes you naturally resistant to infection from a lot of things. So if you've ever noticed a plant that doesn't have an ear, or a plant that deer, ripped the ear off of, or even a plant that deer bit off 3/4 of the ear, and there's a little stump of an ear there with 100 kernels on it. If you've ever noticed how green, sometimes they'll even turn purple. The purple is excess sugar that builds up in that plant tissue. It has excess sugar because it's photosynthesizing, it's producing sugar, and it's got nowhere to go with it because it doesn't have enough grain on that ear, or doesn't have an ear at all to utilize that sugar. Those plants will be healthy till Christmas. A freeze is going to kill those corn plants because they're making all that sugar and they're storing it all in the stalk, storing it all in the root, storing it all in the leaves, and that basically makes them, impossible for a fungal infection to take them out. So we know hybrid makes a difference. This is something that we're getting really, 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 really serious at in our breeding program. We're funding some research at Nebraska and Iowa State, looking into crown rot. We're looking at seed treatments. We're looking at nematicides. We're looking at genetics. We're looking at foliar fungicides. We're looking at Bear spending $2.8 billion a year on breeding and genetics and research. And some of that investment is getting plowed into crown rot because it's a big time problem, and we got to get something figured out with that. But there are differences in hybrids, and so if we tell you that this hybrid is susceptible to crown rot, and don't put it on black poorly drained soils, well, don't put it on black poorly drained soils. Now, it might be great on your rolling timber ground. It might be fine on that heavy black soil if you're planting May 15th. But if you're planting April 10th, be careful what you're putting on your heavy black soils, because that's where the crown rot is. Crown rot, those dark, productive, high organic matter soils. It's pretty rare to see it on light timber soil. And, the lighter the soil is, the less likely you are to see it, like sand, for example. You're not going to find crown rot on sand very often. You're not going to find crown rot on white timber soil very often. And some years, I don't know that this will be one, because those fields could have been hurt more by the dryness. But some years, the light ground that stays healthy actually out yields the black ground that dies early. So you may see that as well. As far as an application of something goes, the single most helpful thing that we found in our research for suppressing crown rot is a VT fungicide application. And you may go, well, wait a minute, Lance, why in the world is a fungicide that I apply in July doing anything to help a root rot that got started in April? Well, here's why. Fungicides alleviate stress. And fungicides make that plant feel better. And the fact that the plant feels better and has less stress means there's less opportunity for crown rot to take over and do its thing. So that's what we've seen. You can look at different products. Timings, I'd stay with the VT. So there were a lot of recommendations coming from other people this year that, let's wait till brown silk to spray our fungicide. We don't want to be out there too early because there's no disease. And if you put it, we only got a couple weeks of residual control from fungicide. So it kind of makes sense to people. Well, I don't want to put it on too early because that's kind of a waste because there's no disease here yet. It's not a waste. The plant is under the most stress of its life right after pollination. And alleviating stress on that plant, at any time is a good thing, but alleviating stress at and a couple weeks after VT is the best time to alleviate stress in a plant. There is no yield data to support that there's more of a benefit to spraying fungicide on brown silk corn than there is at VT. VT is the sweet spot. Stick with that. The other reason I don't like waiting is, how many have ever had a field that you turned in to get sprayed with fungicide that got sprayed earlier than you wanted it to? That doesn't happen. There's always a lag there. I mean, sometimes the lag is 2 days, sometimes the lag is 2 weeks. But that's the other reason I don't like to wait, because typically you're going to end up waiting a little bit longer than you wanted to anyway. And if you've already waited too long, then you're waiting even more too long. So go with that VT application. I don't care if you've got silks. I don't care if it's not pollinated yet. It doesn't matter. If you can see tassels, spray your fungicide sometime between then and green silk, which is population is making a difference this year. I did some population trials on his farm. He was planting 36. He put out a strip at 33. The 33 was noticeably greener, and the 33 out yielded the 36. So I had a question in the chat here. Any thoughts on seed treatment impact? Does it do anything early to help prevent initial disease? So good question. And yes, it does. We got, when we started putting EDC on everything, we quit doing these trials. But prior to that, we were up to 7 or 8 years of data comparing the EDC treatment, which is our enhanced disease control treatment, which is just a high rate of the same ingredients that are on regular acceleron treatments. And we do see a suppression in crown rot from that higher rate seed treatment. Now, having said that, that high rate seed treatment is on every bag of DeKalb corn that we sell. and we still get crown rot. So it is not a solution, but it does help. We're also very interested to see if the new N314, which is our nematicide product that's going to be offered on SmartStax Pro and VT4 Pro, what impact that product could possibly have. And there is some evidence to suggest that nematode feeding on corn roots could be making crown rot worse. So there's a possibility that N314 treatment, because it's not just a nematicide, it's also a fungicide. So there is some hope that that could help as well, but we shall see. So in my mind, seed treatments are not a solution, but they do go in the category of things that can help. So one of the more dramatic things we've seen this year, and I'm gonna don't get too worried. I'm not gonna do another video. I'm just gonna show a picture. So that's a hybrid split that we're standing in there. Let me show it this way. So which side of that split would you rather be on? And what do you think we got going on there? You think that's is that a fungicide trial? Is that two different hybrids? Some sort of seed treatment? Some sort of what do we do there to make such a dramatic difference in plant health? Well, would you believe that's the same base genetics? The green side is the SmartStax version of that hybrid, and the brown side is the Tricepta version of that hybrid. Now, I want to illustrate a few things in this picture here. So you can see in the green corn, you can see some dead tops, right? Well, that's anthracnose top dieback. But obviously, the plant's alive. You don't see too many ghosted plants there. Now, there's one right there that might be a ghosted plant. But basically, you just got some top leaves dead. Now, you look over here on the other side, we've got some plants that are completely dead, ear flopped down. This is 116-day corn. 116-day corn should not be this dead this early. Those are ghosted plants from crown rot. And now I don't know what the yield difference is going to be, because I guarantee you this one over here had more yield potential to begin with. This one over here might end up more. So we do see improved plant health from SmartStax hybrids. We do see better late season stay green. This year, we are seeing a dramatic reduction in the amount of crown rot that is in those hybrids. And normal version is going to yield more. And that's why we primarily sell might actually yield the doubles and the Tricepta, which is weird. That almost never happens. And if you see that, I haven't seen any real evidence that the difference we're seeing between the two versions is related to rootworm feeding. Anything that's pruning your roots, feeding on your roots, doing damage, you're going to be happy you've been doing that. Next year, might be something to consider. If we don't have crown rot next year, probably just going to cost you yield. If we have a repeat of this year, which we won't, we'll talk about that here in a minute. I'm making that prediction today. Next year will be different. And if we do everything next year that we should have done this year, we'll do everything wrong again next year. So let's not overreact to this year, because it's just 1 year, just like last year was one year, and just like the year before that was 1 year. How much money would we have lost the last 2 years had we sprayed corn with fungicide like we needed to in 2021, just because that was the right thing to do in 2021? So you gotta remember that every year is just a year, and this year that just happened isn't any more important than 1 year that happened 5 years ago. But we act like it's a lot more important because it's the one that's the most fresh in our mind. So going down through my list here, V5 fungicide. So V5 fungicides are not a solution ground planter to apply an in planter that would enable you to apply in furrow fungicide, or if you can do it the furrow, if the product's labeled, I guess that's okay. I don't think 2x2 is probably put it, but if the manufacturer of the product you want to try says it's effective in a 2x2, then I'd go by what they say. But I would be playing around with some stuff if you've got the equipment on your planter. I would say, in my experience, I haven't necessarily seen anything that's had such a dramatic benefit that I think it would be justified to spend a bunch of money to put equipment on your planter. But some of the manufacturers of those products have programs that would enable you to fairly cost effectively get a starter system on your planter that would allow you to use in furrow fungicides. And all that's doing is just adding to the fungicide that's already on the seed. For those products to have an impact on crown rot, they have to be effective. My guess is if you've got a fungicide, good. So that's the tricky part. You got to have something that, it's fine to put it in furrow. It's fine to put it there by the seed. It's fine to think, oh, well, that ought to do some good. Well, if it doesn't have efficacy on the right species of fungi that are responsible for the problem, it's not going to do any good. So that's something I close to the furrow. There are products out there that are going to claim that they can help, and I would be trying them. Now, if you want to do some tests on your farm, let's say you're using fertilizer starter, because that's a comparison. The other thing you need as a manager helped. So I get awfully frustrated. I talk to growers that have used particular products. Oh, it was great. I said, do any trials? No. I said, did you leave any checks? Well, then how you know what it did? Well, I had corn. Well, good for you. But your good corn might not have a damn thing. It's pretty disappointed because I don't want to dig any roots. So I didn't dig any roots. And he was disappointed in me because I did dig roots. So anyway, the best way to evaluate crown rot actually is to, the easiest way, do some push tests on your stalks, do pinch tests on your stalks, do a kick test on your stalks. Any ghosted plant with enough crown rot in it to matter is going to have a hollow, rotten stalk. You're going to push it over and it's going to not come back. You do a little kick test, you can just break it off right at the ground. So you don't necessarily have to dig roots to evaluate crown rot. I do have some more pictures here, and since I took the time to put these in, there we go. So something else that you want to look for when you're looking at crown rot is, are you seeing a lot of red? Now that is so much red. I actually think that's probably red root rot. So red root rot is not technically considered crown rot. I don't know why, to be honest with you. I'd have to ask the pathologist why we don't just consider root rot to be crown rot. It's actually like crown rot on steroids. It's nasty stuff. So if you're seeing really bright, like magenta, like red, like that could be red root rot. Now, it can also be crown rot because fusarium will oftentimes make pink coloration. Here's another, there's a dandy there. You can't raise much more than 100 bushel corn with a root system like that. Now that plant kind of looked like it was probably a lesser plant to begin with, and had a very, very hard life. But anyway, just some pictures of what we're seeing out in the field when the lazy agronomist does take time to dig some roots. So let's see. Let's wrap up here with the wackiness of the year again. I mean, this year is just very unique. Things happen this year. Every year different. There's never been talk to any farmer that's farmed his whole life and ask him, have you ever seen 2 years the same? If they're honest, they're going to say no. They're all different. So every year we see things, so this year you may think, oh, well, I need to be doing fertility in the strip and I need to be doing full blown strip till because my neighbor does that. It looked awesome. And it did look awesome. And it's a good system. But if it's better than normal this year, that's because of the year. If you've been having success with your system, you don't need to change your system. This was a horrible year for side dress nitrogen. Is side dress nitrogen a bad thing? Should we all start putting all of our nitrogen on in the fall or all pre-plant? No. Side dressing is a good management practice. Not particularly good in a drought, but it's a good management practice. This just isn't a year that favored that practice. Cover crops. This is not a year that favored cover crops. Now, I think some of the cover crop fields probably will have less crown rot in them, so they're probably going to maybe catch up a little bit. But if something you've had success with for the last 5 or 10 years that you've got a lot of confidence in, that previous years has been great, and this year it happens to be horrible, don't abandon that practice. That's a proven practice. And it's going to be tough to evaluate hybrids this year. I'll tell you one more quick story from the wacky department. I had a guy text me last night. Actually, they were planting one of our hybrids. Planter broke down. They were down for 2 days. They resumed planting. Didn't even clean the planter out. I don't even know if it left the field or not, or if it just sat there until they got it fixed. But 2 days later, they started back in planting right where they had stopped, and they finished the rest of that field. That field was being harvested yesterday. 4 points difference in moisture, dramatic difference in plant health and greenness, 40 bushel yield advantage to what was planted 2 days later, side by side. That's the only difference they can come up with. The field was managed exactly the same. Whole field got same hybrid. Two days difference in planting, and for whatever reason, there was a lot less crown rot in that stuff that got planted just 2 days later, and that's making a 40 bushel difference in yield, making it 4 points wetter, and it looks nice instead of looks dead. And we're seeing example after example after example of that. And that's the same hybrid. So if you had not seen how good it could have been, you probably would have said, "Oh, that hybrid sucks. That thing just no good at all." Well, it wasn't good in one situation, but it was great in another. So it's going to be really hard to evaluate hybrids this year. It's going to be hard to evaluate farming practices this year. In some cases, I honestly think the best management practice might be to largely ignore what you see in 2023, just because it's a funky year. Now, the joke I tell is, if it's my hybrid you're disappointed in, well, then you need to ignore 2023. If it's somebody else's hybrid you're disappointed in, well, it must have just been a bad hybrid. It's all I can figure. So anyway, with that, I hope you're laughing instead of mad at me. With that, I will let you go. I did not look up what 2 weeks from today is. Maybe Jennifer told me that. Nope. Let's see what else here. Boop, 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 boop. Okay. So 2 weeks from today, what would that be? It's the 21st. So today, you've all got calendars. You can look it up. 2 weeks from today will be the next Ask the Agronomist broadcast. Probably won't be coming to you from the bank. Maybe at yet a new fancy swanky location somewhere. So anyway, everybody stay safe through harvest. I hope your corn and soybeans are a pleasant surprise to you. And I hope things going well. And I hope you all stay safe. Take care.